needs anticipation refers to activities to identify future skill needs on the labor market. And when we speak in the ILO about skill needs anticipation, we speak about a strategic approach which uses consistent and systematic methods. Sometimes it's used as a term interchangeably with forecasting or identification of skill needs. What is important is we are looking at the potential imbalances on the labor market, and these imbalances could be both quantitative as well as qualitative. Why is it important to identify these? We all, as individuals, workers, employers, education providers, and governments, invest into education training. And imagine the situation when someone has been trained for many years into higher education, let's say in economics, and at the end of the day doesn't get a job, rests unemployed, or has a low-skilled occupation eventually. So what does it mean? It means that the person eventually lost on returns, lost on the investment in education and training. The returns are lower than the person imagined, and the same also may concern government if the education was publicly funded. Yeah. And the reasons for that could be multiple. So it could be really a structural reason that the field of education of his studies is not something required on the labor market. It could be the reason that the economy doesn't really produce enough jobs at the skill level, at his skill level. So there is no really enough absorption of higher education graduates. Or it could be that his education is such a poor quality that it's really a quality reason, and that's why he's not employable. So we really need to understand what's happening there. And the complication is, of course, that the education cycle itself takes 3 to 5 years. And plus to that also the time to develop occupational standards or competency standards, as well as curriculum development, also take time. So we need to see ahead, we need to look at that ahead. And of course it's easy to say, but not so easy to do, because we live in ever-changing times, and actually the economy is changing ever faster than before. And this is also due to a number of the so-called global drivers of change, the factors that influence economies all over the world. And it doesn't matter whether we speak about developed countries or developing countries. So these factors are, for example, demographic change. We know that, for example, in developing countries, we still see the situation of growing labor force. According to the estimation of the ILO, we still need to produce around 40 million of jobs per year just to cope with absorption of the fast-growing labor force in the world. That's a huge challenge by itself. At the same time, we see the situation in developed countries with aging population and eventually shrinking labor force. But there are, of course, other global drivers of change, such as technological development, such as environmental policies, transition to green economy, climate change, such as globalization and trade liberalization, where many investment decisions are actually happening upon the availability of skilled workforce in the place of investment. And educational attainment itself as well, because we know that in the recent decades, the situation with the achievements of education in both developed and developing worlds has improved tremendously. And at the same time, we still see that many employers cannot really find the workforce they are looking for. So that it's a situation of the mismatch. But due to the fact that there are more and more people available on the labor market with higher skills levels, it also affects lower skilled people who are likely to be crowded out. So we need to understand all those trends. We need to take them into account. And what is important in terms of the ILO, we work with our stakeholders, with constituents, employers, workers, and training providers and governments to understand what these trends will be and what we can do jointly in order to see the vision, identify the vision we want, and to achieve that. That also goes in line with the recent ILO initiative on the future of work, where we also speak about the future we want to achieve rather than adapting to the future. Labor market information system and skill needs anticipation, of course, are very much interrelated. Skill needs anticipation is an integral part of labor market information system. But if we speak about labor market information system, it's a much broader concept because it looks into all actors of the labor market. So it's information about all labor market actors, their intentions. That also includes the administrative records, the legal provisions. It goes really way beyond the skills component. But what is important, the labor market information system as a system has some important prerequisites. And these prerequisites also include information flows, coordination, interinstitutional mechanisms. And skill needs anticipation as part of labor market information system also can be broken down into small pieces in terms of building the system. So we speak about data. Every country should have a minimum requirement in terms of labor market information on skills needs, on demand and supply and mismatch. Then the next component is methods, how to identify that, tools with the instruments that help us to identify, and finally institutions. What is important when we speak about labor market information as well as skill needs anticipation? These should not be produced just for the sake of production and shelving. What is important, we really need to look at the results and make sure that the stakeholders are capable of translating that results into some meaningful practical policies. And for this we need institutional mechanisms and a social dialogue that also makes it possible to make the sense of the findings. And if we think about what to do if the country doesn't have labor market information system well established yet, I would say that it shouldn't become a barrier in identifying the necessary skill needs. You still can go and assess the skills, current skills and the future skill needs. What is important, however, is to make sure that this becomes a building block in the labor market information system. Think in a consistent way, in a systematic way, and where the coordination mechanism will be, whether it's the Ministry of Labor, or Ministry of Education, or a tripartite council of technical vocational education and training, or human resource development that will coordinate this information. But this is very important to see the systematic value of these kind of exercises. There is no one universal method, no silver bullet in skill needs anticipation and matching. We have the whole variety of methods, and in fact what you see that in countries that have quite well developed skills anticipation systems, they employ the whole variety of methods. So we have some quantitative methods. So for example, quantitative model-based forecasts usually produced at macroeconomic level, looking at sectoral and occupational level forecasts. And that ones are suitable if you would like to make a kind of high-level investment decision into which kind of training program to invest as government. But it might not be very useful for any qualitative type of question. And such model-based forecasts are very well developed in many countries, such as the UK, France, Germany, United States, mostly really developed countries, the Netherlands and many other countries. They use them, of course. When it comes to developing countries, it's much more difficult to implement those because these methods are very much data hungry, and it makes it quite challenging to implement. The ILO assisted Vietnam, the Philippines, some other countries to build their models, mostly looking just at the employment by occupation level forecast, but it's also challenging enough, and usually what we see that countries continue to need the support and capacity building, technical support and capacity building continuously. And also the data issue remains there. So if you would like to have more detailed results of such a forecast, of course you need to input much more detailed statistical data. Then of course we have a variety of qualitative methods. Many of them are very interactive, such as focus groups, foresights, roundtables, and those are based on involving of stakeholders. These are very important, of course, and these are very easy to implement anywhere. And in fact, even if you have a forecast, even if you have a very good statistical system, these are the methods which are anyway important and easy to implement. But they also have their own drawbacks because they could be easily pointed to subjectivity and also to inability of people to see beyond a certain time in the future, to imagine the future. Of course, there are also other types of qualitative or semi-qualitative methods, such as surveys of enterprises or surveys of establishments. These are also useful. They're useful in bringing the information about the skill gaps. This is a qualitative information, and skill shortages in terms of quantities. But also, it is difficult to use them to understand what the actual demand in future will be. And this is because also employers have their own limitations in defining what the demand for workers will be in future, and therefore we end up with quite inflated data. Then, of course, there is a method of tracer studies or school-to-work transition surveys that help to understand how well the graduates of certain programs perform in the labor market. And these are also important in the decision-making on adjustments of investments into different training programs and improving their quality. So, of course, all these are important components of a good labor market information system and skill needs anticipation. And in a good system, they work in a complementary way. So it's not that there is one universal method which would solve all problems, but in fact, a country needs to pursue different methods. And which one to employ totally depends on what kind of objective you have. So if you have a qualitative question on which competencies and skills will be needed in future, there is no way to answer that question with a quantitative method. You have to employ something more or less qualitative, be it a survey or a combination of a survey with focus group and roundtables. So, for instance, in the ILO, we use a number of tools, of course, but in our experience, it's quite useful actually to work at sectoral level with countries, because if you look into a specific sector, that's where the work on skills anticipation becomes very practical and meaningful for all stakeholders. That's where you actually can find out which specific competencies are missing now, which specific competencies will be missing in the future. So one of the tools we use is Skills for Trade and Economic Diversification, the so-called STED. So STED we have applied in a good dozen of countries, and the approach we have there is embedded in a broader export policy, if you want. So we're looking actually at the ways how the sectors can improve their export performance and overall competitiveness, and therefore also how they can improve the productivity of workers there. What we do with stakeholders, and these are usually employers, workers, training providers, government institutions, and sometimes we go to the provincial level. So, for example, in Vietnam, we worked on the tourism sector in 2 provinces. So they also involve local level representatives. So we look into the specific objectives of the sector and construct a vision which they would like to achieve, and look together with constituents of the sector what it would take in order to achieve that vision. Which business capabilities are there, which business capabilities are missing, and what would be the role of skills development to bring the sector in line with the vision it has. This is a very good approach because that helps actually to put data, tools, discussions, everything into meaningful perspective of achieving a result. And it's actually also quite easy to do at a sectoral level. And then sometimes also when we work with stakeholders, we discuss what would be the important institution building component to help the sector to implement those changes. So for example, in Cambodia now, we have the whole discussion about how a sectoral skills council can be built in order to implement those ideas. The results of skill needs anticipation have a variety of purposes. They can be used for policy making, employment policy, education and training policy. They can be embodied in broader policies such as trade, investment, industrial policies, taxation policies, and so on. The results are also used in the design of curricula, training programs, in the design or redesign also of competency standards, occupational standards. Also, the results are very widely used by career guidance and vocational counseling, be it through public employment services or through vocational guidance at schools. The results can be also used by enterprises, by businesses, to make also decisions about where to invest in training, or whether they would rather go into recruitment, because they also need the information on the labor market where graduates are and will be, or whether they need to be proactive in terms of investments in human resources and build their own resource, and for many other purposes. So in order to make sure that the results which are built, the data collected and analyzed, are meaningful actually for these purposes, it is important that the stakeholders are in charge at the beginning also of the whole process of skill needs anticipation of this activity. And the ideal way to do that is to also to build the institutional mechanisms. What is important in the system of skill needs anticipation is that the actors of that system have a say on which data are collected and what kind of information and analysis is produced from that data. And for this, it is very important that they become active participants of the whole process. They also can decide on how the whole information is coordinated and make sure that pieces of information are complementary to each other.